Namaskar, my name is Supriya Sule. I'm a member of Parliament, Baramati constituency, Maharashtra, Nationalist Congress Party member from the Lok Sabha. It's really a pleasure for me to be a part of this lecture series called Reimagining India. I actually like to believe that I come from a society, a city where I grew up just dreaming about what a beautiful country that we are. And we are blessed to be born Indian. And truly what difference can we make to make people's lives better? My job as a woman, as a daughter, as a mother, as a citizen, and as an elected representative, I've actually blessed with such multifaceted roles. And every role is very interesting. Every role is beautiful, it has its challenges. And each one really tries to contribute to the growth of India. And not just me as a woman. It is a contribution of every woman and every citizen who belongs to this beautiful country. And I think when I turn back and look at my life, the first thing that comes to my mind is today when I look at India, vis-a-vis the India I grew up in, are slightly different. And they're different in a way that I think that years have gone by. Technology has changed our lives. We should have been a far more liberated and more evolved society. But when I look back, I feel the Mumbai that I grew up in, or the India I grew up in, was far more liberated, far less judgmental than where we are today. And I really say that because I'm a Mumbai girl. I grew up in a very normal household. I do come from a political background. But nobody was judgmental to me. Mumbai is one of the finest cities in the country, which is probably one of the best levelers. It doesn't matter which city, which family you're born in, which caste you are, which creed you are, or who your father is or your mother is. The average Mumbaikar really doesn't care about it. And you really integrate into a society. It didn't really matter what gender you are. Today when I see society, or when I read about things, or I see things happening, I sometimes stop and wonder that are we a modern India or are we a regressive India? Because these issues which are discussed today, are highlighted today, never really existed when I was growing up in this city, or in this country for that matter. And which way are we going? Let's take the first example that comes to my mind, is about blind faith. I have faith in many things. I have faith in people. I have faith in divinity. I have faith in my relationships. I have faith towards my stakeholders. But do I have blind faith? I don't. There is Shraddha and there is Andhashraddha. And I grew up in a society which actually, especially from Maharashtra, which is one of the most modern, liberated states in this country, which fought for every right for a woman. And that's why for us, Shraddha is very important. But Andhashraddha is something we absolutely don't believe in. And we were brought up in a society which was, Andhashraddha was taboo. And today on television or through the media, I constantly see Andhashraddha happening. And it's really disappointing because the scientific temper of this country and this state, and we as citizens, we're losing the scientific temper, is my personal assessment and judgment of the situation. Not judgment in a bad way, judgment as an assessment of what I see and what I read of people. So I really feel that we need to stop and introspect. There is left and there's right. Every political party has a left. Then there's left center, there's right center. We really need to decide how far we want to take politics just to win votes. Ideologies are very good. I think there has to be contrasting ideologies. That's what a vibrant democracy is all about. So there's nothing wrong in being left or right as long as there is conversion at some point in the larger interest of the nation and all our stakeholders. I was talking about Shraddha versus Andhashraddha. I'll give you a small example. Just a few weeks ago, I don't want to name any state per se, but there was a child who was ill-treated. His word I would like to use, because of some Adha Shraddha and rituals. Now these were rituals hundreds and thousands of years ago. Today with technology, fortunately there was mobile, somebody recorded it, then a hue and cry in this country. But when are we going to stop all this is my question. These are things, I mean, when we go abroad, there was a time 20 years ago, everybody thought India had no roads and there were elephants walking around here and there were snake charmers here. That's what India was all about. Today people don't look at India like that. It's one of the most vibrant economies. Our entire workforce and our entire population is a huge strength for any economy. So when are we going to get out of this snake charmer image? Vis-a-vis even today, India internationally was doing exceptionally well. Now I don't want to get into them versus it, but some facts have to be put on the table. It's like when Dr. Manmohan Singh ji had a relationship with a country like America. I mean, I still remember President Obama saying that my guru is Prime Minister Manmohan Singh ji. I was so proud when he said that, because I was proud that one of the most powerful nations, which is America, looks at my Prime Minister. Not just because we belong to the same ideology, but India's Prime Minister is my Prime Minister. It doesn't really matter which party he belongs to. And internationally, he built beautiful relationships across all countries, and India was a lead player in policies worldwide. Today, when we look back, are we really in that position? Is something what we need to introspect. I have exceptionally high regard for our External Affairs Minister. He's a colleague, he's been a professional. I'm not criticizing the policies of the government, but I really want to know that when we challenge our neighbors or when we challenge authorities in America, is this really good international relationships? Today there was a time when the present administration took oath, all our neighbors were present for it, which is a wonderful thing. But really today, what are our relationships with our neighbors? Where are we looking at our relationship with China? Be it through economy, through social issues, for 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I think we really need to look at the global picture of India, because today we are no more in isolation. Our economy is not isolated. We're a global player. So unless we improve all our relationship with our neighbors, no point taking very hostile and extreme stance of our country. We have to have dialogue with all our neighbors, with every country in the world today, and look to build bridges of dialogue, because I feel conflict and wars and disagreements bring nothing except unhappiness and widows to any country. We're seeing what's happening in Afghanistan. It's not a pleasant situation for no country. And eventually at some point, it is making the world uneasy. So any country which is especially so close to us as Afghanistan is going through unrest, it's something for us also to introspect and reach out and see. We had dialogues with them, but have we really succeeded in them? We haven't. So I think we really need to, India needs to look at their policies, their foreign policies, because I think, and why not get all our stakeholders involved? My point is, why not take advice of Dr. Manmohan Singh ji, who's one of the finest global leaders that we have. He's an asset. Just because, I mean, you know, this central government constantly talks about cooperative federalism, talks about dialogue with the opposition. Do we really see it happening? I don't see it happening. I'll give you another example of all these very complex issues that I'm bringing in front of you. I'm a part of the opposition in the central government. We debate bills. What is a good, vibrant democracy? Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar gave us one of the finest constitutions. And while we have a robust democracy which is so vibrant, which the whole world talks about. But are we in that position today? They are 303, we're only 100. But that doesn't mean that everything, just because numbers are great, you can really bulldoze ordinance after ordinance. I can understand if there's a crisis, there's an ordinance. But the central government's top priority of getting anything done is an ordinance. Is that the right way forward for a vibrant democracy? If you personally ask me, it's not the wisest decision. What is the importance of parliament then, if you're going to bring in ordinances and then pass them in a hurry? I think it actually takes away from the basic soul of our constitution and what India stands for, or what Mahatma Gandhi stood for. So I think this ordinance route is not the right route, and this is something has to stop. We can wait for parliament sessions, and if something really critical comes up, why cannot we ask for a special session and get laws passed? While we are passing laws, we suggest amendments. Now, why are we suggesting amendments? Because we are agreeing with most of the bills. We're just asking for strengthening them. So if you take one or two amendments in a legislation from the opposition, my point is, what is wrong? This is how we become a vibrant democracy. So I take this platform to urge, even for all of us who are watching this show, is what is your view? Because I would really like to know, because I strongly feel that whichever side you're sitting on, why cannot we take suggestions from each other and make the bill stronger? We are not voting against the bill. We are voting with the government, but take our suggestions, because the opposition is here to help you, to assist you for better legislation. I'll give you another example. Finance is an example. I have a lot of high regard for Nirmala ji. We work very closely. She's a very gracious lady. There are many times she's been exceptionally gracious and talked about suggestions that we have recommended to her. But unfortunately, they are not taken or implemented. That's what I feel a bit disappointed about. And another important part of this is that sometimes we make suggestions while we are debating. They don't take those points, and then after 6 months later they realize, yes, we should have done it. So they bring in amendments as their improvement, and the bill comes back, and the amount of time and processes and money that goes behind all this, had you taken those suggestions from the opposition and implemented it, we would have all saved a lot of time, energy while implementing the bill. So my whole point is, I think India is you versus me has become bitter. Politics was never bitter in this country. It's so personalized that sometimes it's hurtful and disappointing, because we can have differences and we must have differences. But should they be issue-based or should they be personal is something we need to discuss. Or even talking about all these very powerful, what should I say, agencies that are used today. I, growing up in India, did not know who the CBI head was, who the ED head was. These were not commoners. These were, of course, authorities which were above board, which were above politics, and none of such offices were misused against the opposition. Today, unfortunately, I can see all these offices absolutely misused against all opposition leaders. I mean, I find it very strange that everybody in the opposition either has a CBI case or an ED case or an income tax raid, and while people in authority seem to be doing something absolutely right. And it can't happen state after state after state. I mean, I don't want to quote that person, but we all know just last week, an actor got raided. He was the blue eye of this central government about a year ago. And suddenly what has he done? Just because he starts changing his narrative about an issue, you immediately have raids on him, and income tax is raiding his home and all. Are these really the right things to do in our democracy? Then what's the difference in fascism versus democracy? I mean, aren't we moving towards fascism if you're going to misuse all these powers and offices to, just because you speak against me, there will be violence. I will use it violence, because misuse of power of any kind is violence according to me. So there is violence against the opposition all the time used. So I think India needs to unite and stand against this. And then they'll say, we don't see a viable opposition. Who says so? We have proved it time and again that there is always an opposition. Just don't go by just because you don't see a few things in media or media houses, which unfortunately are also targeted. I mean, I've never seen media houses getting raided and targeted. You write one story against the government, ED coming your way, CBI coming your way, raids coming your way. It's very unfortunate because I haven't seen the emergency, but I've read about the emergency. And this is the same leaders who today talk against the emergency, and today there is not an emergency per se, but I see an unrest and misuse of power like what one has read during the emergency. So I really see a complete conflict in what they say and what they really do. Or even what happened in Kashmir. Nobody was against it. Good dialogue is wonderful. But I still remember speeches saying that within 3 months in Jammu Kashmir, we'll make sure investments come. Within a year, you will see robust tourism happening, great new projects coming. Has it really happened? It hasn't happened. So I think when you are taking such strong actions, you have to take all the stakeholders together. What happened in the Northeast? I mean, one of our officers, Mr. Nimbarkar, I would like to put some of the facts on this table while we are discussing this. Mr. Nimbarkar is an officer from Maharashtra. He is from my constituency, who's posted in Assam. He's an SP in Assam. And what was the conflict of two interstate violence? I mean, something unheard of. Two states of India are fighting against each other and go so far that one of our sons of our soil is shot by our own people. Do you really think this is fair, this is just, or is this what democracy stands for? I mean, there was violence on the border of Assam, within our own two states. The two chief ministers had to intervene. What was the intelligence doing that time? How could an intelligence fail? We lost people in that violence. Who is accountable for this? Should central government not take ownership of this? It's not just about showing all the good numbers, but internal security of this country is one of the most important things we must discuss. And interstate disputes, I take back to the favorite word of this government called cooperative federalism. These are two BJP states which are fighting against each other. There's a central government which is a BJP ruled, and two states are BJP ruled, and still there is conflict. We have lost our sons in that violence, and from my own constituency, Mr. Nimbarkar is still recovering. Almost lost his leg. He's still in bed and trying to recuperate and get better. At what cost does this come? Is violence a solution for any problem? Clearly not. This is Mahatma Gandhi's India. We got our freedom by fighting through non-violence. And where are we standing today? We are so proud. I was so happy when the Honorable Prime Minister put Northeast on top of his priority when he became the Prime Minister. But today, really are the numbers showing this? Is something we need to introspect and needs to be discussed and debated. So when we talk about policy, policy is just not having a beautiful debate in Parliament. Policy is to make a beautiful legislation with good and a healthy debate, taking good suggestions from the opposition, integrating it, talking to our states who are going to implement these programs and make sure our stakeholders and the last person benefits from what legislation we make. So it's really important, and I'm really fortunate enough that I'm an integral part of a system, our Indian Parliament, which we are so proud of, that we need to make very good legislation. I'm too tempted right now, but I need to put this also in front of you for debate, that I'm not against the Central Vista at all. I'm against the timing of the Central Vista. First of all, India has one of these most beautiful parliamentary buildings. Do we really need a building? Not really. This is not the time for it. Of all the development that's happening in Delhi, I am for development. It's about the timing. We're just sort of just dealing with and surviving a pandemic. While we are surviving a pandemic, instead of putting all our energies into making sure everybody gets good health care, we are arguing and debating about the Central Vista. So let me put it on the table that I'm not per se against the Central Vista, I'm against the timing of the Central Vista. That is disappointing. I'll give you another example, is the MP lads. Every MP in this country gets 5 crores every year for development in his or her own region. Now, for the last 2.5 years is what the Honorable Prime Minister in Parliament announced, that for 2.5 years, all the 800 MPs will not get the monies which are given for all the development work in their constituencies. Now, really tell me, do we need the Central Vista, or do the MPs need money for development in their constituencies, which could be completely put into all healthcare issues? Another big issue which really concerns me right now is about education. And it's about girls and boys, because education is the biggest leveler. And I think the wonderful program which our constitution gave is Right to Education, the RTE program, which against Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's vision document, and all the wonderful people who put it together. And we were lucky enough that during Atalji's, Vajpayeeji's government was the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan program, which was again then taken forward by Dr. Manmohan Singh ji's government. And the Right to Education bill was brought in. And it was a wonderful and a positive step. And this pandemic has given a huge setback, because there have between the haves and the have-nots. And the have and the have-nots is no more just about money. It's about connectivity and about technology and a mobile phone. And this entire digital divide that India is going through. Now, instead of the Central Vista, should we have put all that money either into MP lads, invest it into healthcare and education? In this entire digital divide, the dropout rate, and these are not numbers just I'm quoting, these have come from Pratham, which is one of the top NGOs in India, which comes out with the Asar report, the Government of India. You read any newspaper, you see all the experts, even from Niti Aayog, talking about it. That education today is a huge challenge, and for all the good work that we have done, the pandemic has given us a huge setback. Children are traumatized that they can't go back to school. Some children cannot cope with online education even if they have access to. And there are millions of children in India who unfortunately don't have a mobile and cannot, or if there is one mobile, it's shared between siblings and the parents. And there's a huge setback, and the dropout rate of girls and boys has become substantial. Now, how are we going to bring them back in the fold? Because child labor has also become a big issue. Today, because of lack of no availability of school and kids or parents losing jobs, even children are working now. So child labor was something we were trying to eradicate, has suddenly gone up exponentially high in numbers all over India. So I think that's the biggest challenge we as a society and as governments have to address, is reintegrate our children into school. And in this reimagining India, I think there are two major projects that we will have to take forward. One is going to be healthcare, and second is going to be integrating education. Once we get through this, then it moves into the next step, which is employment. Because aspirational India, today everybody aspires for a good quality education, good healthcare, good livelihoods, and why not? But with this pandemic, again, there's going to be a huge setback with employment. So much technology is coming in, we're losing a lot of jobs to technology. So how are we going to skill our people? Even skilling is not necessarily delivering. I'll give you a very small example which you will relate quickly to. There was a time when we gave interviews, there used to be so many cameramen coming. Now many times the journalist holds the speaker in one hand, which is a mic, and in the other hand he or she has a camera, which is their mobile. There goes one more job gone, which is something which is something we all relate to lives. And this is happening everywhere. It's happening in banking. Because of technology, banking numbers, jobs will go down. So technology, at one level is going to make life easy, but at one level it is going to reduce jobs. So we will have to find ways to skill ourselves better, or differently is going to be the right word, and we'll have to innovate all the time for all these activities. The other big stakeholder which gets affected in all this change are women. For women, not because I'm just a woman, because I represent men and women in parliament. So it's really unfair for me to say it's only women. Men, women, and I think India is going through a new societal change where it would not even just stop at male and female, but there's a big LGBTQ community which you see far more forthcoming in the country today, which wasn't the case while I was growing up. It was still, everybody knew it existed, but nobody really talked about it. So in reimagining India, when we're really looking what is the way forward, we need to look at healthcare, we need to look at education, we need to look at unemployment or employment with skilling, and how to integrate it in three verticals, which is men, women, and LGBTQ. And I think it's not going to be an easy road. The whole pandemic is going to become a big challenge. It already is a challenge for all of us, and it's going to leave a lot of marks at different levels of society. But we have to look for solutions, and we have to ride the tide. So when we talk about women, especially if we talk about that vertical, what I see during the pandemic is domestic violence has substantially gone up. Because most people are at home, things have changed, there's no outlet, and then it comes out at home, which is a very, very unfortunate case. And we have done a very interesting project in our district. In Maharashtra, we have Jilla Parishad, which is exceptionally strong as a unit to implement a program. And what we achieved here with the entire team working is when we realized that the domestic violence cases were going up, we did two major programs during the pandemic. One is we used technology, and in every village in the Pune district, we made WhatsApp groups where we sort of highlighted that domestic violence is taboo. It's something you have to shame people for, and the entire village, all the women come together, counsel the family, and if they need an expert, the expert will come in and counsel the couple. But that issue has to be raised, highlighted, spoken about, and that woman has to learn to say no. If my husband is going to abuse me, I'm not going to take it. And why should she take it? Now, how do we empower her furthermore? We are doing, of course, most of our women are highly educated, but they're not financially independent. So we are doing a mass banking literacy program in our district. So we are integrating, and there's NABARD, there's Mavim, which is our women strengthening program. We have Jilla Parishad, and we are using a lot of banks and taking talent from them. And we are integrating, it's a conversion of all agencies working together at two levels. One is highlighting the issue of learn say no to violence, or learn to say no for anything that you don't want, which is against your wish. Stand up for it nicely. You don't have to be rude or go to the police station, but as a society, we can hold each other's hand and help each other and stop domestic violence. And if it's happening, we look down upon it. So people have to realize that we have to respect, and this is not only against women. Violence against any citizen, be it a child, be it a man, be it a woman, is something that has to stop. So that's where we are taking that program with the help of WhatsApp and technology at every ground level, where we are getting ASHA workers, all our Anganwadi Sevikas, all of us involved in every village as a family. That's the first step. And next step is financial inclusion, where the flagship program which Dr. Manmohan Singh ji started was about making sure everybody is integrated and everybody has a banking account. It's not just enough to open a bank account and say, wonderful, you have a bank account, you're on your own. There are so many bank accounts of women which are just dormant. We just don't want wonderful data. The data has to be used into reality to empower people. So these two flagship programs that we're doing, one is of intervention of emotional health, and the second one is about livelihoods. So we are integrating and strengthening women through jobs, and we've even integrated Narega into it. So Manrega, the woman will stand on her feet, her money comes into her bank, and it's in her name and she knows how to manage her own money. So Narega, which unfortunately is a program which the present dispensation in Delhi was so against, today has delivered superior results in this pandemic. This Narega has really helped rural India survive and stay afloat during these challenging times. And I take great pride because Narega is a program which was started in Maharashtra first. So it's a gift that we gave, and we are blessed that Maharashtra played such a big important role in forming this policy today. So the real intervention that we can do in this gap right now is strengthen Narega, do it extensively through women, this domestic issues of strengthening emotionally and financially and making. This is a solution for rural India. In villages we can integrate, but this is not the solution for cities. And there is a whole lot of women force which has actually fallen out even in urban India. So rural is doing okay, urban we need to still look for more options. What we have come up in Pune is we are trying out something called women's malls. So we are starting malls for women where women will take turns and they will come and sell their goods. And it could be like a shopping center which will have very specialized goods and homemade, targeted, wonderful things which are not available in stores. Because today, India is very, very competitive with the entire product line. So it's very hard for women to really come up and sustain the quality. So it's not easy, but we have to still keep working on what all options do we have. There are women's groups who are doing small LED lights for any celebration, be it Christmas, be it Diwali, be it Dashera, anything that you got, Ganesh Chaturthi as we're going. So all these women, if they are skilled to a specific product line, and if we do one block, one product, which we have done in Pune district. So if we have 13 blocks, 13 product lines is what. Otherwise, if everybody starts doing everything, there is no market for it. It just gets flooded and there is nothing, it's not a win-win for everybody. So we're trying to micromanage it. And even for the cities, if ward-wise, if we could do activities for women. And this is not only about women who are uneducated. Even there are professional, educated women who are looking for jobs, maybe even part-time. There are opportunities like that. So we're trying to integrate all this because I feel that there are two gaps which we will have to deal with when we are out of the pandemic. One is this education gap. So we will have to take help of several NGOs who have worked on the field. So there'll be governments working and there will be NGOs working. So I take this opportunity to share with you that we've reached out to a lot of good NGOs like Pratham, and there are many NGOs in Maharashtra who are working in very good quality education and integrating them with government programs. And we have started another program of Donate a Mobile. So we've asked a lot of people, most homes have old mobiles. You get a new mobile, they get it. So if you don't use your old mobile and the charger and it's in good quality, please donate it. Donate it to anybody you like. So if you can give it back to somebody, a child can be educated. But I'm hoping that the third wave doesn't come and we need to start reintegrating and restarting our schools. So the faster we vaccinate, the faster the schools can slowly start. And there are many, many ways of starting schools. We can start it in smaller groups, we can start some offline, we can do some hybrid, but we need to slowly and steadily start schools so that this entire digital divide that children are suffering through, we ride this bump. And it's going to be very, very critical because another big challenge we are having is emotional trauma that everybody's been through. So I think emotional health has become a new topic which I'm so glad that we've been able to talk about it openly. As they used to call it mental health. I don't like to call it mental health, I call it emotional health. Because I think India was it was a taboo to talk about emotional or mental health. And people said if you go to a psychiatrist means you're crazy. So I think one thing which big plus we've achieved, that India has been able to put this mental health and emotional health issue on the table and everybody's openly talking about it. So that's going to be a big project we need to take from walking from the pandemic into the next level. So I think that's one big program which we have taken. There are a lot of people who are helping us do it. We started an app in Maharashtra. The Women and Child Department is working very, very aggressively towards finding all the people who are willing to work together, where we can start counseling, because we are not, I mean, no government is really prepared to have so many wonderful counselors. So can we have little films on it? Could we have podcasts on it? Can we use technology in schools, through women's self-help groups, to see what more we can do for emotional health? So that's one big thing we are doing. And I think one thing which needs health, which is going to need a lot of help over the next 5 or 10 years for me personally, is all these widows and these orphans of the pandemic. That's a big challenge ahead of us. We are running in Maharashtra a very big program for that, where we have, I mean, all the collectors have been told we've done conversion of all. So Labor Department, Education Department, Healthcare Department, Rural Development and Women and Child and Revenue Department have all put all their machinery together and reached out to every child and family who has either the woman is a widow or the children have both lost their parents. So it's one of our flagship programs and commitment to all these families that whatever central government gives as well as what the state government contributes, we have to converge all these departments to make sure none of these children or women is left out of our country's or state's growth story. And what we'd like to add to them, which we are very, very keen on for all these children, is they need to get recognition and no exploitation happens. A lot of times what happens is the property of these children or their wife is taken away by somebody else. So we have to make sure that stays within the family and it's done and kept in their name, one, and that's how they are protected. And second most important program is child marriage. A lot of time these young girls in such kind of families are married off earlier, which is something where, I mean, we're trying our best to make sure it doesn't happen. So child marriage is a big outcome, and exploitation of women or property are two very big challenges, which I think it's not just in our state, it's happening in every state. It's not necessarily happening in majority, but even if one case happens, I think that's something we have to commit ourselves to. I think the whole journey ahead for the next 5, 10, 2 years, with what is happening in the country, the little bit of instability that comes from Shraddha to Andhashraddha, so that little uneasiness, misuse of all the power in the agencies, which again, you know, is not a fair, just government. I think, and we have a pandemic. So is really this the time? This is the time for us to unitedly stand and put country first, put all our differences aside, put vaccination as our top priority, hygiene as our top priority, education, healthcare, women's rights and gender equality. I think robustly form good legislation on this, take good projects which all states are doing, a good idea exchange programs. The Honorable Prime Minister could call all the chief ministers and ask them that what good conversion success stories have you given. And I'm sure there are many governments doing a lot of very good conversion programs. Share it as a good document so that all the states can integrate and work together, and all of us legislators, if we can also sit together, because this is not the time about tu meme. This is time about us against the virus. We are all on the same side. So we are really, the whole world is going through a very challenging time. So I think we need to be very, very sensitive at this time. We have to strengthen all our powers, put all our talent, all our bright minds together to come up with good policies to reimagine India post-COVID, post all these uneven things that are happening in the country. Make sure every citizen is not scared. Fear is not something good for any democracy. Today, India talks about fear, journalists talk about fear, citizens talk about fear. So it's time for us to think, reinvent, and learn to say no, be it a woman or a man. If somebody is going to bully you, I'm not going to let them bully me, at whatever cost. I think that's something we need to stand up to. If you are honest and committed to a cause that you believe in, stand up to it. Challenges will happen. People may try to bully you, but have the courage and the conviction in the larger interest of your nation and your stakeholders. And I am so confident that India is one of the oldest cultural heritage nations that has contributed to the world. And we will ride this tide, we will survive this, and we will contribute not just to us, but to the well-being of the world. Thank you.